Hello, welcome. Carrie Burchill here with another episode of Shine Like a North Star. I am excited to spend some time with you today. I've got some insights that are going to help you slow down to go fast. Let me explain a little bit of what we're going to talk about today with this beginning picture of a tomato plant. Believe it or not, we're going to talk about how we grow people. So this is me in our backyard with this almost head high tomato plant. I am flat out bragging to my mom in this selfie because I'm originally from Canada. And you may know, Canada does not have a very long growing season. And I now live in Texas, which has a fabulous summer for growing. Heck, you could even grow things in the winter, which I have learned I should do. Let me back up and explain. So I have these 11 tomato plants that are just awesome. And they're all as tall as the one in that picture that I just showed you. I am babying these tomato plants. I am growing them. I am watering them every night. And if I can't, my partner is. When we went out of town, we paid one of the neighbor teenagers to water them. Like, this is a bunch of loved plants, and they are growing. Now, I had visions of doing some canning. We were going to have these tomatoes that I grew. My pantry was going to be full of all these organized jars. Like, I really was excited to grow these tomatoes. And did I tell you, I grew those plants from seed. So I have nurtured these things starting last February. Little 8-carton seed plants. Then they became larger. Then I bought the cages. I mean, I grew tomato plants. What happened? I hardly had any fruit. Like, I'm talking maybe 6 cherry tomatoes and 1 or 2 half rotten, half whole, regular sized tomatoes. Like, nothing that I could actually can. Never mind canning. Nothing I could even eat in the salad. I mean, I'd go out there some days making a lunch going, oh, some tomatoes would be awesome. Oh, I guess I'm just not late enough in the season. My plant hasn't produced tomatoes yet. I'm pollinating them. I'm talking to them. I even have cinnamon on the leaves so that the worms don't get involved. Like, I have grown these plants. Makes you wonder about the leadership analogy, right? We spend lots of valuable time growing people. And maybe you're like what I did with the tomato plant. I want you to ask yourself, like, what are you growing? Obviously, as leaders, we grow people, we see opportunity, we mentor, we do lots of great energy around growing. And I'm just challenging us in this LinkedIn Live today, Facebook Live, wherever you are watching this, to think about, what are you growing? So yeah, I grew tomato plants. Was it in the right season? No. Could I have planted them in the winter and they would have done better? Pretty guaranteed, because the summer was too hot for these tomato plants to thrive. It wasn't the right season. So while I spent a ton of energy growing something, what was I growing? Some really tall plants that didn't produce. You know, it makes me think of when I did my PhD. I was so proud of completing my PhD. And when I went back to my regular full-time job, did they give me a raise because I have a PhD now? No. Did it change my job description? No. Right? That role didn't need that growth. Now, have I since positioned myself to really take advantage of the PhD? My consulting work uses that work every single day. Valuable. At the time, it wasn't the right context. It wasn't the right environment for that to happen. So what are you growing is the first question. I also want you to ask yourself, how does that growth align with what needs to happen? Right? So the growth, obviously, that I wanted in the tomato plants was to have tomatoes. What needed to happen was that they produced tomatoes, which couldn't happen in that current context. It didn't matter that I fertilized them, which I did. It didn't matter that I watered them all the stinking time, which I did. Right? It wasn't the right season. So what are you growing? Are you growing tomato plants to produce tomatoes? Or are you just growing some really tall plants so you can brag to your mom that you can grow tall plants? Because that's all I did. Multiple people in Canada that I know and love got these pictures because I'm bragging about how tall my tomato plants are. Aha, you can't grow plants this big. And sure enough, my friends at home are showing me their short tomato plants. And oh, guess what? They produced tomatoes. right? So let's think about what that might be and also where your bias might blind your perception. So I had a bias that if I was growing great tall tomatoes, I even trimmed them back so that they weren't stressed. I had the right branches doing the right thing. I had a bias that if I had really healthy tomatoes that bloomed, I would get tomatoes. I didn't consider the other factors. And I'll tell you, I did seek out advice from my Canadian counterparts. And they talked to me about pollinating and talking to them and trimming them the right way. Yeah, that works in Canada. In retrospect, if we go back to, what am I growing? I'm growing tomato plants in Texas. It's different. Did I ask my Texan neighbors? No. I even gave them tomato plants. Many of them said, oh, no, thanks. I don't want to grow any. Probably because they knew that this summer was not a great time. Never mind that we had like record breaking heat, right? I mean, there's a few other variables that compounded my inability to grow tomato plants that produce tomatoes. So we're slowing down today to really think through, what are you growing? And is it the right context? Is it useful for what you're trying to do? I'm also wanting you to think about, does that growth align with what needs to happen? So we're growing and mentoring and respecting and honoring people because we all feel good learning. One of my sort of frustrations with the bigger world out there is in this time of financial burden, companies kind of looking at where they can claw back money, people being really burned out, tired, all that kind of stuff. We take away learning as one of the first things that often goes in organizations. And that's a pet peeve of mine. Not only because I'm a lifelong learner, I love learning, obviously PhD in educational leadership, but because one of the antidotes to burnout, the antidote to figuring out what we should do next to recover, is learning and growing. So slow down to say, are my staff, teammates, peers, are we learning just because they like learning, or are we learning the right stuff? Are we growing in the right way? So when I think back to my PhD, that PhD wasn't because I wanted to get a promotion in the company I worked at. I started the degree because I knew that I could think better and sharper and smarter. I just needed to figure that out in my head. I knew that if I got a PhD, it would open up other opportunities for me. And so I went to school full time to really embrace everything that had. I knew that it wouldn't make a difference in that organization. I was disappointed that it didn't, but it made sense. Like, the organization wasn't growing me to get my PhD to be promoted. That wasn't the organization's mission. So ask yourself, who am I growing? What am I growing that for? How does it align with where we're going? Because learning for the sake of learning doesn't necessarily mean growth. And growth doesn't necessarily mean moving forward. I grew 11 beautiful tomato plants. I mean, they were gorgeous. And I plucked all of them out with hardly any fruit, and certainly none that went in any can, in any jar. And we do this now, right? We sort of let people drive their development and their growth, which we do want that synergy, right? What are you interested in? And here's what the organization needs. We want to be sure that we give people the sandbox and have them build their castle in the sandbox, but give them some parameters around, here's the development opportunity I see that you could really embrace given your skills and talents, and here's how those skills and talents develop to the next level are going to contribute to organizational goals, to that innovation, to the next space that we aren't super clear what the next space is going to be. We just know that we need smart people that think and are engaged and go develop and learn so that you can bring back what that looks like. We know of the companies, Post-it back in the day, let people have one day a month or a week, whatever the frequency was in their lab, doing whatever fun projects they wanted to do, which is how we figured out Post-it notes, right? They figured out what's the perfect amount of sticky stuff on the back that wouldn't take the paint off, would still hang on the wall, blah, blah, blah. Those people were engaged. They developed some ideas that really led to a very innovative business model and a bunch of other cool products that sort of emerged from that. Let people learn and develop and have it be aligned with what your organizational goals are. Sometimes in that spin, the day-to-day spin that we all get caught in, we just get requests for people to go to conferences or get requests for different growth opportunities. Or maybe we just assume that people are growing and maybe they're not. Maybe they're just like doing the work in place kind of spin. Learning and development is a powerful engagement tool. It reduces anxiety, it reduces burnout, it helps build innovation, it helps build collaboration when we slow down to think, what am I growing? How does that align with where the company's going? And what are my biases around what I think is happening? Because I grew some really great tomato plants that did not produce tomatoes and got plucked out of the ground after my water bill was higher, after tons of energy was spent watering them, after I paid the neighbor teenager to water them when we were gone. Like the whole package, right? What was I growing? Yeah, not very productive. So slow down with me. I'd love to connect. We've got workshops on feedback and giving tough conversations and a bunch of other topics. If you want to be in on one of the workshops, ping me back and let me know. You can find me at carrieburchill.com. You can also check out my website. There's a bunch of free resources there, some things to kind of percolate your thinking around some of these topics as we go through another episode of Shine Like a North Star. Let's be in touch. I'd love to learn how I can help you assess how you're growing people and make sure that it's aligned with where you know you need to go.